gotta get back to the past because the ending was slack. For those who watched it like I did, I'm sure that you can agree that Samurai Jack Season 5 was one hell of a ride. Before I begin this review, I'd like to point out that I haven't seen the original 4 seasons of Samurai Jack, and only picked it up due to my curiosity at the show's return making me want to watch it, and my god am I glad I did. It was a breathtaking tale, and though only 10 episodes long, it felt like an incredible journey. I'm sure those who watched the show when it was back on Cartoon Network and watched it beginning until end would feel even stronger about this. Now, as I said, this review is from an outsider's perspective, as I haven't seen the original Samurai Jack. But I have to say, I am incredibly glad the decision was made to continue the series as opposed to reboot it like a lot of cartoons are resorting to nowadays. This was one of the first shows in a long time where I actually watched the episodes as they came out and kept up to date, so I could read about people's thoughts as the episodes came out, particularly on Reddit, and had to dodge spoilers left and right, like I do my responsibilities. I don't think I've ever been this invested in a show for a long time, and I loved every second of it. The only thing I didn't like about the show was the conclusion, the grand finale, the end. It was such an awful ending to an almost perfect show. But before we get to that, let's start from the beginning. The day that Samurai Jack was announced to return was a good day for animation. The original series came to an abrupt end back in 2004 and never received a proper ending, which was heartbreaking for many fans of the show. Samurai Jack was one of the many shows that comprised the childhood of so many people who grew up with the classic Cartoon Network, and to have the show prematurely cancelled was awful. Cut to 12 years later, with Samurai Jack allegedly returning with a brand new season intending to properly wrap up the series, though featuring darker and more violent themes. It was like an early Christmas to many, and though I myself was never interested in the series, I knew enough about the show to know that its return was a momentous occasion. A cartoon returning after being vacant for 12 years was unheard of, and now shines a ray of hope onto other shows that were cancelled without properly being concluded making a return as well. When I began Season 5, I knew enough about the series thanks to the intro promo on every Ben 10 DVD I ever owned, as the Samurai Jack theme song was present as a trailer on each. I knew of Aku, I knew of Jack, and I knew he had to go back. However, now that I've finished the show, I can successfully say it was a hell of a lot more than just a battle between a lost samurai and his demon arch-nemesis. The show begins in an interesting way, showcasing the time jump of 50 years between the previous season and this one. Jack has not aged, but everything else around him has. We see him with new weapons, a new and awesome set of armor, and new people to save. It is immediately obvious that Jack is without his trusted sword, the one he requires in order to defeat Aku, yet it doesn't stop him from wasting some bots in an epic fight scene during the first few minutes. The initial threat Jack encounters are the interesting daughters of Aku, girls trained from birth to kill the samurai. During the next few episodes we see Jack powerless to stop them, overwhelmed by their sheer strength and numbers and forced to retreat. We are treated to tense and exciting scenes switching between Jack hiding from them and attempting to fight back. The moment when Jack is cornered and has no other option other than to fight was an epic one, made even more so by the most memorable event in the entire season. The moment Jack takes another human life. One of the initial appeals to me, and I'll be honest, one of the only reasons I ended up checking it out in the first place, was the promise of a darker and more violent season. And the very first moment Jack draws blood is heart-pounding. A majority of the season utilizes this new mature rating very well, with bloody fight scenes and more violent encounters. It made the stakes feel higher, and it was definitely needed in a show like this. Of course, anyone who has seen the season know how the rest of it goes. Jack survives a beating from all of the sisters, eventually overcomes them and kills all of them but one, whom he decides to spare. Archie. Though she was initially reluctant, she soon finds out that Jack is telling the truth the whole time, and the two of them become close and eventually fall in love, and yeah, I'll get to that later. Overall, the journey prior to the final battle was amazing. The pacing was perfect, the battles were slick and intense, and though I personally wasn't a fan of the art style, many of the scenes perfectly conveyed emotion and drama, proving that the animation style isn't that important when there's a fantastic story to be told. Like the best shows do, Samurai Jack contained plenty of scenes with light humor, though knew when to be serious. Though they followed a linear story, each episode is quite distinguishable from each other. For example, the episode where Jack goes missing and Archie goes in search of him, along the way encountering people that Jack had helped in the past and learning of his good deeds. There wasn't a single moment pre-ending that I didn't enjoy, and though some scenes got a little ridiculous, overall it was amazing. Except for episode 8, the, romance episode. Let's not talk about episode 8. God, I've never been so uncomfortable watching something before.
Yes. Oh, something's poking me.
Okay, well, it was uncomfortable and embarrassing to watch, yes, but it was necessary and honestly very well done. It took me a while to understand what this episode was about, as the villain fought and the subplot introduced had no bearing on anything else in the story. But the point of the episode was to serve as development for Jack and Arshi's relationship, and finally ending with that satisfying kiss. A moment that would become incredibly bittersweet come the end of the series. Of course, the characters were great, though limited. Though it was my first time experiencing what these characters were like, it didn't take me long to pin their key aspects. Jack, of course, was fantastic. We see him constantly trying to withhold his moral code and honor despite his conscience begging him to end it all. The scenes of him struggling against his darker thoughts were symbolic and representative of depression, and throughout the course of the season we see Jack rise up from his lowest point thanks to the introduction of Archie. He was an interesting character and never ceased to be badass. Aku was a bit of a surprise for me. I expected him to be more of a menacing villain and one of those generic muhahaha bad guys, but I was pleasantly surprised to find him to be a bit more comedic and honestly at times hilarious bad guy whom we get to spend a few scenes with. Archie was a character that I was initially skeptical about, as it was blatantly obvious from the second she was redeemed that she was to become the love interest, but she and Jack made for an amazing pair. Her naivete made for some funny moments, but her overall badassery made her stand out from a lot of the other characters in the show. The scene where she battles and honestly beats the crap out of her mother to save Jack was one of my favourite moments of hers in the show. She was a badass throughout, and yet, much like Jack at times, could be absolutely adorable. Her and Jack's relationship seemed a little rushed as the episodes went on, but overall I thought it was nice. It was nice to see Jack happy after he'd reached his lowest point. More on that later. Scaramouche, Aku's #1 bounty hunter, was instantly a favourite for me, and his battle with Jack in the first episode will forever remain my favourite fight in the entire show. We got to spend small parts of some episodes afterwards when he tried to inform Aku of Jack's loss of his sword, even though he had been decapitated, and introduced some needed humour to contrast with the more serious story of Jack and Archie. It was a freaking shame, however, that Scaramouche was offed so abruptly. The scene in which he and Aku danced together was adorable and probably one of my favourite things ever, but the moment where the two encountered Jack and Aku finds out he got his sword back, Scaramouche was instantly killed. It served as a cheap laugh, and I'll admit the shock of it caught me off guard, but it was a damn shame for such a hilarious character to disappear so quickly. I guess it just goes to show how ruthless Aku is. Also, that scene where he says penis is hilarious, and I will fight anyone who says it wasn't.
Wow, what a freak! Looked like a talking
One thing that I could appreciate, even though I never watched the original, was the continuous cameos from older characters and the returning plot points and areas. It was a beautiful love letter to fans, and it was so refreshing to see creators that actually cared about the show they were producing enough to include little things like Demongo showing up for a brief second. Another example is the Guardian's glasses on the ground near the end of episode 9. I didn't notice they were there the first time I watched this episode, but I'm sure fans of the original instantly recognized who they belonged to. It was such a brief shot and yet so eerie. The ending battle was awash with these cameos, and as I said, though the show was good enough on its own, your experience was most likely enhanced had you seen the original seasons. Overall, I could never contain my excitement every time a new episode was released, and the pacing, characters, action, humor, and drama made it one of the most unforgettable shows I've seen in a long while, even if it was only 10 episodes long. It felt like a journey, and it was absolutely amazing throughout. Now, for the thing that ruined it for me. The ending. A lot of my complaints and critiques will echo those already said on the Samurai Jack subreddit, which was home to many other disappointed fans, but I do have a lot to say about the ending. Though the pacing in the other episodes was fantastic as it spent time building up the suspense and tension, a few moments seemed quite wasted, especially considering how contrived and rushed the final battle was. For example, episode 8 had no bearing on the rest of the plot aside from character development, and though it was a necessary episode, I didn't feel like it needed to be something that took up an entire episode. In saying that, maybe the pacing was a little too slow, as the first 6 episodes built up the story fantastically, but as a result it made the other 4 episodes feel like they were rushed in time for the ending, which was an absolute shame. That said, I wouldn't have wanted any of the other episodes any other way. The cliffhanger at the end of episode 9 was one of the most epic cliffhangers I have ever seen, which is what made the ending hurt even more. The ending of Samurai Jack Season 5 is perhaps one of the worst endings I have ever seen in the entirety of my life. Ugh. It was everything I feared it would be. Rushed, unsatisfying, and honestly inconclusive. Everything that was built up not only from the past 9 episodes but also the entire show amounted to practically nothing. The stage was set in episode 9. The waiting time for the next episode was perhaps the most agonizingly long week of my life. I desperately wanted the ending to be perfect, and though I knew it would be difficult, I thought considering how brilliant the writing had been prior in the other episodes, that the writers could pull it off. But they didn't. The beginning of episode 10 was nothing but hype. Aku narrating the intro to the original show. Seeing all of Jack's old allies watching on as Aku prepared to finally kill his archenemy. It was filled with suspense and I waited with anticipation. How was it going to end? I was so looking forward to an epic final battle. I got one. Sort of. Much to the delight of fans, many of Jack's allies show up and attack Aku, freeing and saving Jack. They fight ferociously against Aku, and then the Scotsman shows up and turns the tide of a declining battle. This allows Jack to focus on getting his sword back, but is forced to fight the Aku-controlled Ashi once more. Of course, she is freed in the only way possible, through the power of love. We're then treated to a scene and concept with a lot of potential that was sadly wasted. Ashi turning on Aku and realizing she has his powers. Though we are treated to a painfully short battle of Ashi using Aku's own powers against him, which was so cool while it lasted, she then realizes that she has the power to go back to the past, and so they do. Then Jack kills Aku. There is no fight. There is no words spoken between the two. There is no epic final confrontation. Jack just slashes the crap out of him and then ends it. I guess Jack cut straight to the point. Then we get a wedding scene, and it was at this point where I knew exactly what was going to happen. I had a bad feeling that in the end, Ashi had to be off in order for Jack to go back to the past, as if there was no Aku, she wouldn't have existed. And sadly I, among many others, was correct. The show pulls a Gurren Lagann on us, Ashi collapses, and then disappears. Then Jack is sad. Then he finds a ladybug. The end. That's it. She doesn't even say I love you back, she just points out the obvious and disappears. After all that they've been through and after a character had been built up, she just disappears for absolutely no reason and Everything was so rushed. The giant samurai robot shows up and is trashed almost instantly. Ashi with her powers literally lasts less than a minute. Aku was killed with no words, no dialogue, no build-up, it just happens. Do you know how people complain that villains in movies and cartoons monologue for too long when they have the hero captured and should just kill them? Yeah, well, this is what would happen if they just went and did it. It would be unsatisfying, anticlimactic, and honestly quite boring. Which was exactly what the ending of Samurai Jack was like. Episode 6 mentions how Jack destroyed a time portal to save a group of creatures and sacrifices his only chance of getting back home. But in the end, he just undid everything and everyone he saved. So what was the point? Why even bother spending all this time helping people if they were just gonna cease to exist? You could argue that Jack didn't know what would happen, but it was so ridiculous to see literally 50 years of his efforts completely obliterated in an instant. Everything he did for the people was for nothing. It may have accumulated in them saving him in the end, but they all disappeared. The same went for Ashi. Her character meant nothing by the end. I can see what they were trying to do with Ashi disappearing mid-wedding, but it wasn't a surprise twist or bittersweet or anything. It was just cheap. It seemed forced, and the way in which she just disappeared without even having any proper final words just hurt. Her quick disappearance reminded me of Scaramouche's. Characters are so quickly off in this show. I don't think the writers understand that if they're going to go to all this effort to make us care about them, at least give them a decent send-off. I was reading about how the events in Season 5 were symbolic of depression, with Jack being at his lowest point and reaching the point of wanting to commit suicide, only to have something help him through it. When he finally overcomes this lowest point, he no longer needed this thing to help him, which of course was Ashi. So while she disappears, Jack is now nursed back to full health. But this doesn't make the ending satisfying or happy or anything, it was just awful. The episode wastes its painfully short running time. Everything is built up for absolutely nothing. It amounts to nothing. Everyone he ever helped was erased. All his friends were erased. Ashi was erased. Everything he did vanished. I just despise how this episode paced. It began slow and took forever for Jack to be freed, but after that I felt like I had accidentally pressed the fast forward button on the remote, because everything went ridiculously quickly. There was no climactic final battle at all. It was so horrifically disappointing. Never before has a show left me so pissed off at the end. Usually I feel sad, empty, and wanting more, but never angry. Above all that the episode pisses me off the most is that it has the audacity to waste the time making a joke about the Scotsman's daughters in an already limited running time. That time could have been allocated anywhere else, but they wasted it on a joke. That wasn't even funny. However, that said, I can't blame the writers for such a shoehorned ending. There was a lot to tie up, and writing endings is never easy, especially for a show like Samurai Jack. At the very least, the ending does wrap everything up in a nice little bow. Jack completes his quest, defeats Aku, and returns to the past, undoing the future, that is Aku. But it was just so unsatisfying. It wasn't a happy ending, it wasn't a fulfilling ending. It was just so blatantly rushed that it honestly stings. I am genuinely enraged that the show finished like that, especially considering how fantastic the episodes were before it. It was all building up between the climactic final showdown, between the samurai who had risen up from his lowest point to fight the evil shapeshifter Aku. Two iconic and well fleshed out characters. And for what? What was the show amounting to? This. This was it. It genuinely hurts. It genuinely really hurts. The ending was also incredibly PG. We'd seen in episodes prior throats getting slashed open and wolves getting mauled and Jack bleeding more blood than humanly possible. But the finale to the show featured barely any violence. Once again, I must add, there was barely any actual fighting. It was just so goddamn disappointing. I have to commend the writers for making me care enough about the characters for this ending to hurt so badly. Samurai Jack desperately needed an extended finale. It was limited enough as it is, once again, as I mentioned, rushing the pacing of the final few episodes, but to have it all accumulate to this was just a joke. The ending wasn't the worst thing ever, and at the very least, at least the show got an ending. But to have it return after 12 years, to have such intense and fantastic episodes before it, all to have it end with a freaking ladybug was just heartbreaking. Many people have said that the better way to end the series would have seen Jack remaining in the future after finally defeating Aku, and working to repair the world from there with his friends and Archie at his side. Sure, Jack wouldn't have completed his original quest, but at least it would have been satisfying and Jack could have been happy. In this ending, no one is happy, because everyone is dead. Now, I am aware some people liked the ending, and I do have to be fair. The ending did what it was supposed to do, and in that respect, it did it quite well. Aku's "back already" line made me smile. I have to admit, even though it was brief and anticlimactic, he did die a brutal death. The ending wasn't spectacular, and certainly didn't continue the quality of the episodes before it, but it had to end eventually. It could have been worse. To be honest, I think I'm just distraught the series is over. But I don't want to complain. Samurai Jack was a fantastic and exhilarating journey, and an experience I will always hold dear. I love this show, and I think it was because I loved it so much that I hated the ending as much as I did. But the ending did what it was supposed to do, and finally wrapped the series up after 16 years. For the most part, I absolutely adored Samurai Jack Season 5. It was a breathtaking show, and it was refreshing to see such a cartoon in the days of shows like this. Seeing it return after 12 years brings new hope to other lost, cancelled or forgotten cartoons, and proves that darker, more mature and gritty cartoons can still be successful in our day and age. It just hurts to know that it had to end in such a disappointing way. But I guess whether I liked it or not, Samurai Jack finally accomplished what he had set out to do. And though the send-off may have been incredibly anticlimactic, at least we got to be there for the ride leading up to it. I will never forget you until the day I die, Samurai Jack.
Penis.